The Catholic Church saw itself as being in charge and taking care of all people. It claimed the right to rule and direct society. The Church performed many jobs modern nation-states do today. For example, they would try civil and criminal cases involving clerics. Decisions made by the Church on matters such as marriage, divorce, and inheritances were binding and enforced by local law enforcement officials. The Catholic Church had its own social pyramid. At the top was the Pope. The Pope was the head of the Catholic Church. He lived in the Papal States, which included the city of Rome. The archbishops were directly below the Pope and enforced his decrees and instructions. Following the archbishops were bishops, priests, and deacons. These church officials interacted more with the people and administered the sacraments. According to the Catholic Church, there were 7 major sacraments. Those sacraments were baptism, communion, penance, confirmation, marriage, holy orders, and last rites. Baptism was the earliest sacrament. Water was sprinkled on a baby's head, and the parents promised to raise their child in the Catholic Church. The water's purpose was to wash away original sin. This was Adam and Eve's sin of eating the apple in the Garden of Eden. The sacrament of communion originates from the Last Supper during the Jewish holiday of Passover. Jesus was believed to have turned the bread at this supper into his own flesh and the wine into his own blood. Catholics believe that priests did the same thing during Mass in a process called transubstantiation. Receiving the Eucharist, or communion, was the second sacrament. The sacrament of reconciliation was the act of confessing sins to the local priest or bishop. It was believed that by confessing sins and paying a penance, they would be forgiven and go to heaven. The fourth sacrament was that of confirmation. It confirmed a person's dedication and loyalty to the Church. The fifth and sixth sacraments were marriage and holy orders. You could not receive both sacraments. You either married or you took holy orders. That is, you became a priest, monk, or nun. The final sacrament was that of extreme unction, or anointing of the sick. This was the final blessing for the sick and dying members of society and is known today as the last rites. In the Middle Ages, churches provided a level of stability. Markets, festivals, and religious ceremonies took place at local churches. Church leaders became advisors to local rulers. Every village had a church. These churches regulated behavior, taught expectations, and consequences. Medieval education had to be paid for, therefore it was mainly accessible to the wealthy. Peasants could only be educated if the lord of their manor allowed it. If a family attempted to educate their sons without permission, they were heavily fined. The most educated were people who worked in the church. These people lived in monasteries, convents, and worked in local churches. Some boys were trained to become priests. Prior to the 15th century, there were no seminaries or specific schools that taught how to be a priest. Due to this, boys were sent to live with practicing priests to learn from them and work as their apprentices. They basically took care of the priests, and in doing so, learned what they did from day to day. Once the priest retired, the boy would take over his position. There eventually became a point when some realized that in order to move their society forward, the people needed an education. In response to this, wealthy merchants set up grammar schools in their towns. Latin grammar was a key focus in these schools. Latin was important because it was the language of communication between merchants. Boys had to learn the information through memorization. There was no ensured depth of understanding. In addition, the teachers taught the older boys, and then these older boys had the responsibility of teaching the younger ones. School lasted from sunrise to sunset, making for very long days. Students were punished by whippings. Students who excelled in grammar school were able to move on to universities in the Middle Ages. Oxford and Cambridge were both founded during this time by the Catholic Church. Girls were mostly educated on how to keep a household. If they were wealthy, they might be educated within their household or abroad. In addition to keeping a household, girls were occasionally taught to sing or play an instrument. Monks and nuns copied, collected, and stored texts that contained religious knowledge. There were no such things as computers, typewriters, or even printing presses during the Middle Ages. Books were copied out by hand, page by page. Most books were kept in monasteries and convents across Europe. A monastery was a place where very religious men went to devote their entire lives to the Catholic Church, and a convent was a place where very religious women devoted their lives to the Catholic Church. They lived according to a strict set of rules. Monks might spend hours a day copying documents and manuscripts. Because of this, books were very expensive, and very few people had access to books outside the Catholic Church. Artwork during the Middle Ages was also heavily influenced by the Catholic Church. Art in this time period included metalwork, illuminated manuscripts, Pisek paintings, silversmiths, goldsmiths, embroidery, mosaics, tessera, sculpture, stained glass, and heraldry. Animals and florals in the art world were very important during this time period. Also, shields and other armors of the soldiers reflected in the Roman style. Architecture was another type of art during the Middle Ages. Gothic architecture was not intended to be dark, as is often shown and used. The intention behind the Gothic style was actually to bring in light. Notable features of the Gothic style include the pointed arch, large columns, vaulted ceilings, ornate stonework in the arch windows, extensive ribwork on the vaulted ceilings, and columns that extended all the way to the ceiling and became a part of the vault. After the medieval time period, the architectural style will shift back to the neat and tidy lines that came before it, as opposed to the flowery and intricate designs of the Gothic era. By controlling education and book production, the Catholic Church ensured its view of Christianity became medieval culture. Because Latin was the universal language of the Church, it was taught to both those entering the clergy and entering government services. Many current beliefs and practices of the Catholic Church were established during the Middle Ages, including transubstantiation and fixing the number of sacraments at 7. The Virgin Mary, Mother of Jesus, was moved from a minor figure in the New Testament to a figure of great reverence. Along with praying to the Virgin Mary, praying to the saints became important, as well as a means for sinners to ask for their help in intervening with God to lessen his wrath. The Church's liturgy was revised, and its teachings were codified in the Middle Ages to ensure uniformity. Many of these practices were adopted by various Protestant churches after the Reformation. Because the powers of heaven were contested and often overcome by the powers of evil, life was considered an unending struggle with the devil and his minions. The devil's powers often thought to turn men and women into his active agents in spreading evil through the land. The last worshippers of paganism were eliminated by the Church, declaring these people as worshippers and agents of Satan and helping him spread evil in the world. Jews were also considered the enemies of good Christians by the Catholic Church. Church propaganda claimed Jewish practices included the kidnapping and murder of children. This allowed some parents to send unwanted children into the forest to die, as told in the story of Hansel and Gretel, then blamed the children's death on the Jews. The fear of Satan's power led to the Catholic Church conducting trials of people accused of heresy or witchcraft. This led to fear in Europe because the accused did not have to face their accuser, who may have lied about someone for various reasons. The Inquisition helped stamp out different beliefs and strengthen the Catholic Church's hold on Europe. Another attempt by the Catholic Church to impose its will in the world was the Crusades. Called by Pope Urban, the Crusades were an attempt to take the Holy Land from Muslims. Many Europeans felt the need to participate in the Crusades because of the power of the Catholic Church and its influence on its members. After heavy loss of life, the Crusades failed in capturing the Holy Lands. The Inquisition and Crusades harmed the reputation of the Catholic Church, and that lasts till this day. The Catholic Church continued the belief that relics from religious figures had the spirit of the person who possessed the items. Also, the Catholic Church built so many churches that the medieval Europeans were never far away from a church and its many offerings of services they provided. These churches were also the scenes of village festivals adapted by the Catholic Church from pagan rituals in order to convert Europeans to Christianity.